was late 1922 when British archaeologist Howard Carter made the discovery that changed history. He had spent decades combing the sands of the Egyptian desert with almost nothing to show for his work. His sponsor, a man named Lord Carnarvon, had wasted 5 years and a whole lot of his own money supporting Carter's work. But now he was ready to pull the plug on the whole project. But just as Carter and Carnarvon were preparing to finally admit defeat, a simple but shocking discovery was made by Carter's team. Beneath one of the ancient workman's hut that Carter was documenting was revealed to be a single stone step carved into the bedrock. A few days later, one step had turned into 12. Beyond those steps was a sealed, plastered doorway covered in ancient Egyptian impressions. At the bottom of the door, the seals revealed the name of the king buried inside and hidden away for more than 3,000 years, Tutankhamun. When the boy pharaoh Tutankhamun was laid to rest at the age of only 19 years old, none of the Egyptian officials in charge of overseeing his mummification and burial thought that he would carry on the legacy that he does today. In fact, once Tut was laid to rest inside the hidden tomb that would eventually become famous throughout the world, the pharaohs who succeeded him actually tried to ensure he carried on no such legacy. Following his death, these men actually attempted to erase the boy pharaoh and his family line from the history books altogether. The reason they tried to do this was the result of decades-old decisions that had been made by Tut's father, who was a controversial Egyptian king named Akhenaten. During his rule, Akhenaten attempted to move Egyptian religion away from polytheism and to force the worship only a single god, Aten, who was a god depicted as the disk of the sun. Tut replaced his controversial father as king at the age of 9 years old. The advisors who guided the boy, including Ai, who was the Grand Vizier and potentially Tut's maternal grandfather, and Horemheb, who was the commander-in-chief of the Egyptian military. Both of these men immediately set out to use Tut's reign as an opportunity to increase their power and draw back the controversial reforms of Akhenaten. Under Tut's rule and guided by these advisors, temples to the old gods were restored, and the capital city was moved back to Thebes, and even the boy pharaoh's name was changed to distance himself from the disastrous policies. Before his reign, the boy pharaoh was actually named Tutankhamun, but he was convinced to change his title to Tutankhamun or Tutankhamun in order to emphasize the distinction from his father. But still, when Tut mysteriously passed away 9 years into his reign, it meant the end of not only his own line on the throne, as he had no living children, but it also seemed to be the end of his family's legacy. Both Ai and Horemheb ruled as pharaohs during the years after Tut. They both tried to wipe their predecessor from the historical record. All public monuments for the life of both Akhenaten and Tutankhamun were destroyed. Their names were erased from the official list of kings. It was an attempt by the new rulers to turn the page and forget the controversies of the preceding generations, and it should have meant that the boy pharaoh and the mysterious circumstances of his death were lost to history forever. But instead, nearly 3,000 years later, the discovery of Tutankhamun's mummy would captivate the attention and fascination of the entire world, and millennia-old questions over the cause of the boy king's death would finally be answered. The excavation of Tut's tomb took nearly 10 years, and more than 5,000 items were removed and documented during the process. At some point, we can do a whole video on the items pulled from the tomb, but for this video, we want to focus on the greatest treasures uncovered by Carter, the one that has birthed generations of interest in ancient Egypt: the coffin, burial mask, and the mummy of King Tut. When Howard Carter entered the burial chamber, he discovered that King Tut was not buried in just one coffin, but rather 3, each one placed inside the other like a Russian nesting doll. The 2 outer coffins were crafted from wood, discovered in gold, and they are stunning on their own. However, the innermost coffin is the most famous and spectacular of the 3. It was shaped in a human image much like the first 2 and made of solid gold. The inner coffin weighed almost 250 pounds. The amount of gold and jewels used in its crafting are estimated to have been worth $1.7 million at the time of its discovery. But even the magnificence of the inner coffin was not the greatest treasure of the burial chamber. Once all the outermost coffins had been removed, Carter was able to get his first look at the king's burial mask. Now, the death mask is one of the most famous items ever discovered from ancient Egypt and one of my personal favorite artifacts from all of ancient history. The mask rested directly on the shoulders of Tut's mummy, which sat inside the innermost gold coffin. It's constructed of 2 sheets of gold hammered together, weighing 22.5 pounds, or 10.23 kilograms. The gold mask is featured with inlays of colored glass and gemstones, including lapis lazuli for the eye surrounds and eyebrows. Quartz was used for the eyes, and obsidian was used for the pupils. Tut is depicted wearing the striped headdress representing the headcloth typically worn by pharaohs. Two goddesses depicted are protecting his brow. Tut also wears a false beard that would have further connected him to the image of a god, along with a broad collar which ends in terminals shaped as falcon heads. The back of the mask is covered with a spell from the Book of the Dead, which was written to protect the various limbs of Tutankhamun as he moved into the underworld. Interestingly, in the centuries following Tut's discovery, researchers who have studied the mask have made observations that seem to point to a potential truth that the mask was not actually designed to be used by the boy pharaoh in the first place. When looking at the mask from a certain angle, there appear to be traces of hieroglyphics that have been removed from the mask. Researchers think that the text might have been a name, potentially that of Tut's mother, Nefertiti. It's theorized that because the boy's death had been so unexpected, the mask was not yet prepared for Tut's own funeral. To solve this problem, Nefertiti's own mask might have been repurposed and changed so that it could be used for Tut's burial instead. For many years, there were even theories that Nefertiti's mummy might have been buried in a secret chamber within Tut's tomb, but modern radar testing has not revealed any hidden chambers, so it seems unlikely that the queen was laid to rest beside her son. And all the signs of the sudden nature of Tut's death beg one of the most interesting questions of all. What was the cause of the young pharaoh's demise? It's taken centuries of scientific examination of Tut's body for researchers to come to a likely conclusion, but now an answer is within our grasp. One of the earlier theories around the cause of death of the boy pharaoh is almost the most dramatic. Examinations of the pharaoh's body done by X-ray in the 1960s noted that there were fragments of bone seen inside the boy's skull. This discovery led people at the time to theorize that Tutankhamun might have died from a blow to the head, perhaps evidence that the king had been murdered. Many elaborate theories were concocted to explain Tut's potential assassination, with the most common suspect being his vizier, Ai, since he had the most to gain from the young king's early death and ultimately succeeded him as pharaoh. Recently, though, the idea that Tut might have been killed by a blow to the back of the skull has been dismissed. Researchers have been able to determine that the actual responsible party for the apparent head wound was most likely Carter and his team, who were not careful with their unwrapping of the mummy. They likely caused the break during their excavation of the body, not a secret murder plot. With intentional murder ruled out as a likely cause of death, a number of accidental causes replaced the theory. The most key piece of evidence for this group of theories surround another injury that was discovered on his body, which was a broken leg. Scientists have determined that, unlike the injury to Tut's skull, the broken leg likely predated his death. However, it is possible that the broken leg led to a fatal infection, which would explain why Tut's death happened so quickly. A number of interesting causes have been proposed for the broken leg, including a chariot accident, a kick from a horse, or even an attack by a hippopotamus. While these are all interesting causes of death, and they can't totally be dismissed, most scientists think that a less dramatic culprit was probably responsible for Tut's demise, and that's disease. Now, it's an awkward fact, but because the royal families of Egypt practiced inbreeding, Tut was likely a sickly child for most of his short life. DNA tests showed that he would have had a cleft lip and a club foot, making it difficult for him to walk. He had hundreds of canes in his tomb. It's also possible that he might have suffered from a disease like sickle cell anemia that could have combined with malaria from a mosquito bite to cause the death of the young king. Regardless of which cause was truly responsible for the death of the young king, his tomb and mummy have become a source of invaluable knowledge about Egyptian culture and history. Although the men who buried Tut 3,300 years ago might have thought the dead pharaoh was embarking on a much different afterlife journey, the real story of the king's life after death is one that has brought knowledge and culture to the entire world.